The guest is inside you and also inside me. You know the sprout is hidden inside the seed. We're all struggling. None of us has gone far. Let your arrogance go and look around inside. The blue sky opens out further and farther. The daily sense of failure goes away. The damage I have done to myself fades. A million suns come forward with light when I sit firmly in that world. How lucky Kabir is that surrounded by all this joy, he sings inside his own little boat. His poems amount to one soul meeting another. These songs are about forgetting dying and loss. They rise above both coming in and going out. Let's take a comfortable seat. Feeling that 500-year-old presence, that voice. Feet flat, squaring off at the knees. Lengthening the back just a little bit. Like I say, just a couple of millimeters. The neck, just a couple of millimeters. Nobody would notice it but you. And then softening everything, the jaw, the neck, the shoulders. And since today is about the alchemy of turning pain into joy, the forge of the heart, just opening those iron doors, softening the belly. And breathing deeply in to the count of 4. And then exhaling, if you can, to the count of 5. Breathing in, I smile at what's troubling me today. Breathing out, I just let it go. Breathing in, I smile at what's troubling me today. Breathing out, I just let it go. Now we're sitting firmly in that world, like Kabir tells us to. Now we're in it. Now the blue sky opens out further and farther. Breathing in, I smile at what's troubling me. Breathing out, I just let it go. From The Guest is Inside You by Kabir. The guest is inside you and also inside me. You know the sprout is hidden inside the seed. We are all struggling. None of us has gone far. Let your arrogance go and look around inside. The blue sky opens out further and farther. The daily sense of failure goes away. The damage I have done to myself fades. A million suns come forward with light when I sit firmly in that world. How lucky Kabir is that surrounded by all this joy, he sings inside his own little boat. His poems amount to one soul meeting another. These songs are about forgetting dying and loss. They rise above both coming in and going out. So you notice this poem goes from lament to praise, but not really lament. It already starts in a place of awareness and acknowledgement. The guest is inside you and also inside me. But it begins with this awareness of the struggle. None of us has gone far. There's a kind of quicksand effort that only makes it worse for us. And so the poet asks us to let our arrogance go and to just look at where we are, to just turn in stillness around and look at our suffering. It begins with a person sitting on hot coals, say, and somehow ends 2 stanzas later with that same person speaking of themselves in the third person, sitting on a lotus. And what happens in the middle here is that there is this spaciousness that causes the change. And it's through this kshanti, this inclusiveness, this creating an ocean out of a glass of water filled with salt. Suddenly, there's space. And that bit of suffering, which took up so much space in the glass of water, is now spread out and dispersed. And the damage I've done myself fades. And not one, but a million suns come forward with that light when I stay and I just look at it and not run away. So this is the way that he's turning lack into luck. This is the way he's turning the hot coals into a lotus. And how he gets to that point at the end where he's really turning and looking at himself from the point of view of the deepest self, the witness self, his true consciousness, and saying how lucky Kabir is that's surrounded by this joy. He sings inside his little boat, like his little lotus. It's a poem about a change of heart. And it's a poem also about seeing the same struggle in others. So Kabir was a 15th century Indian poet from Varanasi, and he's associated with the Bakhti Path, which is the path of devotion traditionally to a god. It could be any number of gods in the pantheon. Now we talk about the Bhakti path as just the path of devotion. It could be of devotion to anything because we can see the God inside anything. And I believe that in a poem like this, Kabir is suggesting the same. That guest is synonymous with God in the first stanza of the poem. And in the act of devoted noticing or deep looking, like we've been talking about this semester, we can find God looking back at us in anything that we fix our attention on, our true attention. Last week, I talked about giving attention versus paying attention to a certain end, and giving attention for the sake of seeing the God in the thing, doing it for the love of the thing. And that's what we're talking about here, and that's where the guest abides. So Kabir rejected really the affiliation with any religion. And that's why I feel at liberty to say that you could find this guest anywhere you look. And the first part of the poem is also devoted, as I said, to understanding others. It's a lot like Mary Oliver's Wild Geese, where she says, you tell me your suffering and I'll tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. So an important part of creating this spaciousness, this sunyata, and the forbearance of Kshanti is to see the guest in others and to try to understand their conflict and their pain and their suffering. And there's this aha moment where you realize that beyond whatever it is that's irritating you about them, there is a very real struggle. The ultimate example I've already written about, but I'll say again, is the story of Wesley Autry, who jumped into the New York City subway to save someone who was having a seizure and who had fallen into the pit just as the train was arriving. And he held this man down as the train passed over them, and they both survived. And later, when they asked him why he did this, he said simply, I saw someone who needed help. And I never forgot those 3 words when I read that in the New York Times. I saw someone. To really see someone is to see into their guest, to see into their struggle, the way he did in an instant. This is the way that you could turn hell into heaven, by being that presence. So the last thing I wanted to say is that the turn happens as a result of sitting firmly in that world. what is happening in the poem is that Kabir is asking us not to run away from the sorrow, but actually to turn around and to look at this sorrow and what we had treated maybe as a ghost to turn into a guest. We have these ghosts that are rambling around in the old mansion, and we can transform that world into something that is welcoming, something that is understanding, something that is loving and even joyful around them. We want to exercise our ghosts, or we want to run away from the old house. But Kabir seems to be telling us, no, just transform the house for them and turn them into honored guests. Make the haunted house into a mansion, into a castle. This is what the Buddha did, to sit down with Mara and have tea with Mara and say, old friend, I recognize you. So let's hear it one more time. Talking about turning our ghosts into guests. The guest is inside you and also inside me. You know the sprout is hidden inside the seed. We're all struggling. None of us has gone far. Let your arrogance go and look around inside. The blue sky opens out further and farther. The daily sense of failure goes away. The damage I have done to myself fades. A million suns come forward with light when I sit firmly in that world. How lucky Kabir is that surrounded by all this joy, he sings inside his own little boat. His poems amount to one soul meeting another. These songs are about forgetting dying and loss. They rise above both coming in and going out. Let's get back into our comfortable seat. Feet flat. I just want to ask you, where is that sorrow in your body? Where is the ghost to be turned into guest? Just turn and look at it without running away, to sit firmly in that world. An area of pain, a general illness, recent bad news, or children or partner struggling with something. Preparing a place for it, not as intruder, to look into its root and its source. Like Wesley Autry, to see someone. and then just to name it. Illness, illness. Sadness, sadness. Unworthiness, unworthiness. Say to it, I see you, old friend. I recognize you, old friend. The arrows turn into flowers and black turns into luck. The damage I have done myself fades. He says, and this is so wonderful, we want to find the big treasure. We have to dive into the shipwreck. We have to dive into the wreck. It's in the wreckage where we find the gold. This is from Thich Nhat Hanh. You might think this is an unhappy situation. I need to go elsewhere. And you'll go from place to place like a prodigal son. When you realize your capacity to be happy anywhere, you'll put down roots in the present moment. The capacity to feel peace anywhere is a positive seed. The energy to run away is not. If we practice mindfulness, whenever we have the urge to run away, we can smile at it, and say, I recognize you, old friend. That's the guest. Bringing your breathing back to the count of 3, coming in. The count of 4 on the exhale. Softening everything again. From the guest is inside you. The guest is inside you and also inside me. You know the sprout is hidden inside the seed. We're all struggling. None of us has gone far. Let your arrogance go and look around inside. The blue sky opens out further and farther. The daily sense of failure goes away. The damage I have done to myself fades. A million suns come forward with light when I sit firmly in that world. How lucky Kabir is that surrounded by all this joy, he sings inside his own little boat. His poems amount to one soul meeting another. These songs are about forgetting dying and loss. They rise above both coming in and going out. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, David.
We love you, David. We love you
David.
so much.
Bye-bye, everyone. Have a wonderful
Bye.